Welcome to One Book, One Coffee, where we explore remarkable books with curiosity and warmth. Today, we're diving into a timeless classic, Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. The fact that you're here, choosing to invest your time with this profound work, says something incredible about you. You could be lost in the endless scroll of social media or glued to the latest streaming series, but instead, you're committing to learning and growing. And that's truly commendable. Nicomachean Ethics isn't just any book. It's a foundational text in Western philosophy, offering profound insights into what it means to live a good life. Revered by thinkers and scholars for centuries, its influence reaches far and wide. Although there aren't modern celebrity endorsements like those you might find with contemporary books, its lasting impact is undeniable. Aristotle himself was an extraordinary figure, a student of Plato and teacher to Alexander the Great. He wrote Nicomachean Ethics with a keen interest in human behavior, virtue, and the pursuit of happiness, shaped by his own experiences and observations of the world around him. Now, a quick note before we dive in. This is a detailed, chapter-by-chapter walkthrough, so it's going to be a longer session. Take your time with it. There's no rush. If you need to step away, save this video to your watch later or forward the link to yourself on WhatsApp so you can pick up right where you left off. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's walk through this book together, chapter by chapter, idea by idea. Let's begin. Picture this. You're sitting with Aristotle himself in an ancient Athenian cafe, steam rising from your cups, and he leans forward with that sparkle in his eye that great teachers get when they're about to share something profound. "My friend," he might say, "let me ask you something that will change how you think about your entire life. What are you really after? What is it that you truly want?" Now, before you answer too quickly, think about this for a moment. You might say you want money, or success, or love, or happiness. But here's where Aristotle gets clever. He'd push back gently and ask, "But why do you want money?" Well, maybe for security and freedom. And why do you want security and freedom? To live well and be happy. And why do you want to be happy? And suddenly, you'd find yourself stumbling, because happiness seems to be the end of the line. You don't want happiness in order to get something else. You want happiness for its own sake. This is exactly where Aristotle begins his masterwork, the Nicomachean Ethics, and it's a stroke of genius. He's not starting with abstract philosophical concepts or dry moral rules. He's starting with the most practical question imaginable. What makes for a good human life? What he discovers in Book 1 will revolutionize how we think about success, purpose, and what it really means to flourish as human beings. Aristotle calls this ultimate thing we're all seeking eudaimonia, which gets translated as happiness, but that's almost misleading for us modern folks. When we hear happiness, we think of feelings, emotions, that warm, fuzzy sensation we get from a good meal or a funny movie. But Aristotle is talking about something much richer and more substantial. Think of eudaimonia more like human flourishing, or living excellently, or being the best version of yourself. It's not just feeling good in the moment, it's about your whole life going well. Here's a beautiful analogy Aristotle uses that makes this crystal clear. Think about a master craftsman, say a skilled carpenter. What makes a good carpenter? It's not that they feel happy while hammering nails. A good carpenter is one who builds things excellently, who uses their skills and tools to create something beautiful and functional. The carpenter flourishes when they're exercising their craft well. Similarly, human beings flourish when they're exercising their distinctly human capacities well. But what are those distinctly human capacities? This is where Aristotle's insight gets really interesting. Plants can grow and reproduce. Animals can move and sense things. But what makes humans unique? Our ability to reason, to make choices, to deliberate about what we should do. We're the creatures who can step back and ask, is this the right way to live? Am I becoming the person I want to be? A human being flourishes when they're exercising this rational, choice-making capacity excellently. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, Aristotle. Are you telling me that happiness is just about being rational? That sounds pretty cold and calculating. But here's where his vision becomes surprisingly warm and holistic. Aristotle isn't saying we should be emotionless robots. He's saying that true human flourishing involves our whole being, our emotions, our relationships, our actions, all guided by practical wisdom. Think about someone you know who you'd say is really living well. Maybe it's your grandmother who radiates contentment, or a teacher who lights up when talking about their students, or a friend who seems to handle life's ups and downs with remarkable grace. What you're noticing isn't just that they feel good, but that they seem to have their life together in some deep way. They know what matters. They act on their values. They've developed good habits. They care for others well. They're not perfect, but they're flourishing. This brings us to one of Aristotle's most practical insights. Eudaimonia isn't something you achieve once and then you're done. It's not like winning a trophy or getting a degree. It's more like being healthy or being fit. You don't just become healthy one day and then stop exercising and eating well. Flourishing is an ongoing way of living, a pattern of excellent choices and actions sustained over time. Aristotle actually says something quite striking. You can't really judge whether someone has lived a flourishing life until their life is complete. This might sound morbid at first, but think about what he means. We've all seen people who seemed to have everything going for them, only to make choices that led to their downfall. We've also seen people who faced tremendous hardships but responded with such courage and wisdom that their lives became inspiring examples for others. Consider the modern parallel of someone building a career. You might have early success, make lots of money, get recognition, but if you achieve it all by cutting corners, betraying friends, and neglecting your health and relationships, can we really say you're flourishing? Conversely, think about someone like a social worker who makes modest money but finds deep meaning in their work, maintains strong relationships, and grows in wisdom over the years. Who's living better? This perspective completely reframes how we think about success and goal setting. Instead of asking, "What do I want to achieve?" Aristotle would have us ask, "What kind of person do I want to become? What would it look like for me to live excellently?" It's the difference between having a career and having a calling, between accumulating experiences and developing character. But Aristotle isn't naive about external goods. He recognizes that it's much easier to flourish when you have enough resources, good health, meaningful relationships, and favorable circumstances. You can be virtuous in poverty, but poverty makes flourishing more difficult. You can maintain your integrity in the face of tragedy, but tragedy is still genuinely tragic. The good life isn't just about internal character. It requires what he calls external goods as well. This creates a fascinating tension that's incredibly relevant today. How much should we focus on building our character versus securing external goods like wealth, status, or security? Aristotle's answer is nuanced. External goods matter, but they're not the main event. They're more like the stage on which the real drama of human flourishing plays out. A beautiful stage can enhance the performance, but it can't make a bad actor good. As we close this exploration of Aristotle's vision of the good life, here's what's so remarkable about his approach. It's both incredibly practical and deeply inspiring. He's not offering us a quick fix or a simple formula. Instead, he's inviting us into a lifelong journey of becoming more excellent human beings. He's saying that the question, "How should I live?" is the most important question we can ask, and that answering it well requires all of our intelligence, all of our heart, and all of our commitment. The next time you're making a decision, big or small, you might find yourself asking not just, "What do I want?" but, "What would the most excellent version of myself do here?" That shift in perspective, from seeking pleasure or avoiding pain to seeking excellence of character, is the beginning of wisdom. And according to Aristotle, it's also the beginning of genuine happiness. So we've been exploring Aristotle's profound insights about human flourishing, and now we're settling into what might be the most practical and life-changing section of the entire Nicomachean Ethics. Picture yourself sitting across from Aristotle himself, steam rising from your coffee cup, as he leans forward with that knowing smile and says, "All right, my friend, let's talk about virtue, but not the way you think you know it." You see, when most of us hear the word virtue, we immediately think of those impossibly perfect people, the ones who never lose their temper, always tell the truth, and probably wake up at 5 in the morning to meditate. But Aristotle's about to completely flip that script. He's going to show us that virtue isn't about being perfect, it's about being balanced. And that changes everything. Imagine you're learning to ride a bicycle. Remember that feeling? You're wobbling all over the place, sometimes leaning too far left, sometimes overcorrecting to the right. Your instructor isn't telling you to find some mystical perfect center point and freeze there. Instead, they're teaching you to develop a sense of balance, a feel for the bike, so you can adjust moment by moment. That's exactly what Aristotle means when he talks about virtue as finding the mean. Now, think about this for a moment. When you're dealing with fear, what are your options? You could be a coward, running away from every challenge, never standing up for what's right, letting fear control your life. Or you could go to the opposite extreme and become reckless, jumping into dangerous situations without thinking, confusing stupidity with bravery. But courage? Real courage lives in that sweet spot between cowardice and recklessness. It's feeling the fear and acting anyway when the situation truly calls for it. Aristotle gives us this beautiful framework that he calls the doctrine of the mean, and it's like having a GPS for moral decision-making. But here's where it gets really interesting. This isn't some mathematical formula where you just split the difference between two extremes. If someone offers you a choice between eating 1 cookie or eating 50 cookies, the virtuous choice isn't automatically 25 cookies. Sometimes the mean is closer to one extreme than the other, depending on the situation and your own tendencies. Let's talk about generosity, because this one hits close to home for all of us. On one side, you have stinginess, that person who counts every penny, never picks up a check, and makes others feel guilty for spending money. On the other extreme, you have wasteful spending, throwing money around carelessly, buying things you can't afford, or giving so much that you harm your own family's security. True generosity finds that thoughtful middle ground where you're genuinely helpful without being foolish. But here's what makes Aristotle's approach so revolutionary. He recognizes that finding this balance isn't just an intellectual exercise. You can't just read about courage in a book and suddenly become brave. Virtue, he tells us, is like learning to play the piano or mastering a sport. You become virtuous by practicing virtuous acts over and over until it becomes second nature. Think about someone you know who's genuinely kind, not fake nice, but authentically caring. They didn't get that way by attending a weekend seminar on kindness. They got that way by choosing kindness in small moments, day after day, year after year, until responding with compassion became as natural as breathing. They've literally trained their character the way an athlete trains their body. This brings us to one of Aristotle's most profound insights. Virtue is a habit, what he calls a hexis, a stable disposition of character. It's not about having good intentions or knowing the right thing to do. It's about having developed the internal capacity to consistently choose well, especially when it's difficult. Consider how this plays out in our modern world. We're constantly bombarded with extremes. Social media pushes us toward outrage or complete indifference. Consumer culture swings between deprivation and excess. Politics polarizes us into camps where any compromise feels like betrayal. But Aristotle's teaching us to look for that third way, that thoughtful middle path that actually solves problems instead of just making us feel righteous. Take the virtue of honesty. The extremes are obvious. You could lie constantly, manipulating everyone around you, or you could be brutally, tactlessly honest, crushing people's feelings in the name of truth. But real honesty? It's knowing when to speak up and when to stay quiet, how to tell the truth in a way that actually helps rather than harms, understanding that sometimes the most honest thing you can do is admit you don't know something. Now, you might be wondering, how do we actually figure out where the mean is in any given situation? Aristotle's answer is beautifully practical. We look to people who have already developed this virtue, not perfect people, but those who seem to have found that balance we're seeking. We observe how they handle similar situations. We practice making decisions the way they would make them, until we develop our own moral intuition. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Aristotle warns us that finding the mean is different for each person and each situation. What counts as courage for a trained soldier is different from courage for a civilian. What's generous for someone with millions might be stingy for someone with modest means. This isn't moral relativism. Aristotle absolutely believes in objective virtue, but he's acknowledging that virtue has to be lived out in the messy complexity of real human circumstances. This is why developing virtue requires what Aristotle calls practical wisdom, the ability to see clearly what's actually happening in a situation and choose the response that will lead to genuine flourishing. It's like being a master chef who can taste a dish and know exactly what it needs, not because they're following a rigid recipe, but because they've developed such refined judgment through years of practice. As we wrap up this exploration of moral virtue, notice how Aristotle has given us something incredibly hopeful. He's telling us that we're not stuck with our current character. We're not doomed to repeat our worst patterns forever. Through deliberate practice, through choosing virtue again and again, we can actually reshape who we are. We can become the kind of people we admire, the kind of people who naturally tend toward balance and wisdom and genuine strength. This sets us up perfectly for what comes next in Aristotle's journey, because once we understand how virtue works in general, we'll be ready to dive into specific virtues and see how this beautiful framework of the mean plays out in the particular challenges we face every day. But that's a conversation for our next cup of coffee together. Imagine you're sitting across from a friend at your favorite coffee shop, steam rising from your mugs, and they lean in with a question that stops you cold. If someone puts a gun to your head and forces you to rob a bank, are you really responsible for that crime? You'd probably pause, maybe take a sip of your coffee, and realize you've just stumbled into one of the most fascinating discussions in all of philosophy. This is exactly the territory Aristotle dives into in Book 3 of the Nicomachean Ethics, where he tackles the slippery, complex world of voluntary and involuntary actions. Now, you might be thinking, come on, this seems pretty straightforward. If someone forces me to do something, obviously, I'm not responsible. But hold that thought, because Aristotle is about to take us on a journey that reveals just how beautifully complicated human action really is. He's not just playing philosophical games here. He's trying to understand something fundamental about what it means to be human, what it means to make choices, and when we can truly say someone deserves praise or blame for what they've done. Aristotle starts by drawing a line in the sand. For an action to be truly voluntary, he tells us, 3 conditions must be met. First, the action must originate from within the person, not from some external force. Second, the person must know the particular circumstances of their action. And third, the action must not be done under compulsion or because of ignorance. Think about this like a recipe for moral responsibility. Miss any one of these ingredients, and suddenly the whole dish changes flavor. Let's unpack this with a story that could happen to any of us. Imagine you're driving down a familiar street, checking your phone for just a second, and you accidentally run a red light. Now, was this voluntary or involuntary? Aristotle would say it depends. You chose to look at your phone. That was voluntary. But you didn't know the light had changed, so your action of running the red light was done in ignorance of a crucial fact. This makes it involuntary in one sense, but voluntary in another. See how quickly things get interesting? Here's where Aristotle gets really clever. He introduces this concept of mixed actions, and this is where our bank robbery example comes back into play. These are situations where someone acts under compulsion, but still makes a choice. The person with the gun to their head chooses to rob the bank rather than die. Aristotle says these actions are more voluntary than involuntary, because in the moment of action, the person is still choosing. They're choosing the lesser of 2 evils, but they're still choosing. Now think about this in modern terms. Consider a whistleblower who exposes corporate wrongdoing, knowing they'll likely lose their job and face legal retaliation. Are they acting freely? In one sense, they feel compelled by their conscience, their sense of right and wrong. But in another sense, they're making a deeply voluntary choice to prioritize their values over their comfort. Aristotle would find this fascinating because it shows how the line between voluntary and involuntary isn't always crystal clear. But here's where things get really practical. Aristotle isn't just interested in these philosophical puzzles for their own sake. He's trying to help us understand when praise and blame are appropriate. Think about someone struggling with addiction. When they relapse, are they acting voluntarily or involuntarily? Aristotle would say it's complicated. The initial choice to use might have been voluntary, but addiction changes the brain in ways that affect future choices. This doesn't excuse all behavior, but it does complicate our moral judgments in ways that feel remarkably modern. Aristotle also spends considerable time on actions done in ignorance, and this is where his insights become incredibly relevant for our information-saturated age. He distinguishes between acting in ignorance and acting because of ignorance. If you don't know that the mushrooms you're serving your dinner guests are poisonous, and you serve them anyway, you're acting in ignorance. But if you're simply careless about finding out whether they're safe, that's a different kind of moral failure. Consider how this applies to our digital lives. When we share information on social media without checking if it's true, are we acting in ignorance or because of ignorance? Aristotle would probably say that in our age of easily accessible information, there's a greater responsibility to know what we're doing. The tools for knowledge are at our fingertips, which changes the moral calculus. One of the most powerful examples Aristotle gives involves a ship captain who throws cargo overboard during a storm to save his ship and crew. No captain wants to lose valuable cargo, but faced with the choice between losing goods and losing lives, the choice becomes clear. This action is voluntary because the captain chooses it, even though it's not what he would prefer in ideal circumstances. The circumstances are constraining, but within those constraints, he's acting freely. This ship captain scenario resonates powerfully today. Think about the difficult decisions leaders had to make during the pandemic: closing businesses, implementing lockdowns, requiring masks. These weren't choices anyone wanted to make in ideal circumstances. But faced with public health crises, leaders had to choose between competing values: economic freedom versus public safety, individual liberty versus collective responsibility. Like Aristotle's ship captain, they were making voluntary choices within involuntary circumstances. What makes Aristotle's analysis so enduring is how he recognizes that moral life is messy. He doesn't give us simple formulas or easy answers. Instead, he gives us a framework for thinking through complex situations. He helps us see that the question isn't always, is this person responsible or not? But rather, to what degree, and in what ways are they responsible? This nuanced approach to moral responsibility has profound implications for how we think about justice, forgiveness, and personal growth. When we understand the complex interplay between choice and circumstance, we become more capable of both holding people accountable and extending compassion where appropriate. We become better at recognizing our own moral agency while acknowledging the real constraints we all face. As we wrap up this exploration of voluntary and involuntary action, it's worth noting that Aristotle isn't trying to excuse bad behavior or eliminate personal responsibility. Instead, he's trying to make our moral judgments more sophisticated, more humane, and ultimately more accurate. He's showing us that taking responsibility seriously means understanding what responsibility actually entails. This sets us up perfectly for what comes next in Aristotle's ethical journey, where he'll dive deeper into the nature of choice and deliberation, exploring how we can become better at making the kinds of decisions that lead to flourishing lives. Because understanding when we're truly responsible for our actions is just the first step toward taking that responsibility seriously and using it wisely. Picture this. You're sitting with Aristotle at your favorite coffee shop, and he's just finished explaining his grand theory of virtue as the golden mean. You're nodding along, thinking you've got it figured out. When he leans forward with that knowing smile and says, "But my friend, the real test isn't understanding the theory. It's seeing how it plays out in the messy, complicated details of actual human behavior." That's exactly where we find ourselves as we dive into Book 4 of the Nicomachean Ethics, where Aristotle rolls up his sleeves and gets wonderfully specific about the virtues that shape our daily lives. Think about the last time you were deciding whether to pick up the dinner check when you were out with friends. Did you grab it immediately, insist on splitting it down to the penny, or maybe sit back, hoping someone else would handle it? That moment of hesitation, that internal calculation. Aristotle would say you were navigating the complex terrain between stinginess and wasteful spending, trying to find what he calls the virtue of generosity. Now, generosity might seem straightforward enough, but Aristotle reveals it to be surprisingly nuanced. The generous person, he explains, gives the right amount to the right people, at the right time for the right reasons. It's not just about opening your wallet. It's about understanding the deeper currents of human relationship and social responsibility. The stingy person clings to money like a life preserver, always calculating and withholding, while the wasteful person throws money around without thought or purpose, like someone trying to fill an emotional void with expensive gestures. But here's where it gets really interesting. Aristotle introduces us to a virtue that might make you chuckle at first: magnificence. In our age of minimalism and humble bragging, the idea of magnificence as a virtue sounds almost ridiculous. Yet think about it this way. Have you ever witnessed someone plan a wedding, organize a charity gala, or launch a community project? The magnificent person, in Aristotle's terms, is someone who can undertake great endeavors with both grandeur and wisdom. They're not just throwing money at a problem. They're creating something worthy of the resources invested. Consider the difference between a tech billionaire who builds a vanity space program versus one who carefully constructs a foundation that systematically addresses global health challenges. Both involve enormous expenditures, but only one embodies true magnificence, that perfect balance between grand vision and practical wisdom. The magnificent person understands that some occasions call for grandeur, and they have both the resources and the judgment to execute something truly worthy. Then there's the fascinating territory of honor and pride, virtues that make many of us squirm in our seats. We live in a culture that constantly tells us to be humble, to not think too highly of ourselves. But Aristotle suggests there's actually a virtue called proper pride, or magnanimity, which sits between the extremes of vanity and excessive humility. The properly proud person has an accurate assessment of their own worth and acts accordingly. Now, think about this carefully. How many talented people do you know who consistently undersell themselves, who deflect every compliment, and refuse to acknowledge their achievements? Aristotle would say they're missing the mark just as much as the person who constantly brags and seeks attention. The magnanimous person, and isn't that a beautiful word, knows their worth without needing constant validation from others. They pursue great things because they're capable of great things, not because they're trying to prove something to the world. This plays out in countless ways in our modern professional lives. Picture the colleague who genuinely deserves a promotion but never advocates for themselves, versus the one who takes credit for every success and dodges responsibility for failures. Neither embodies the virtue Aristotle has in mind. The truly magnanimous person would clearly communicate their achievements when appropriate, take on challenges worthy of their abilities, and maintain dignity whether they're being praised or criticized. But Aristotle doesn't stop there. He explores what we might call social honor, how we navigate the complex world of recognition, status, and reputation. There's a virtue he describes that sits between being overly ambitious for honors and being completely indifferent to recognition. The person with proper ambition cares about honor, but only honor that's truly deserved and comes from people whose judgment matters. This resonates powerfully in our social media age, doesn't it? We're constantly navigating the tension between seeking validation and maintaining authenticity. The person who posts every achievement, every meal, every thought is perhaps too eager for honor and recognition. But the person who completely withdraws from social connection and refuses to share their life might be erring in the other direction. The virtuous middle path involves sharing genuinely meaningful moments and achievements while maintaining perspective about what truly matters. Aristotle also delves into the virtue of truthfulness, particularly in how we present ourselves to others. He identifies three types: the boaster who exaggerates everything, the self-deprecating person who consistently underplays their abilities, and the truthful person who represents themselves accurately. In our LinkedIn-optimized world, This feels remarkably relevant. We've all encountered the person whose online presence seems to inflate every minor accomplishment, just as we know people who seem incapable of acknowledging their genuine skills and successes. The truthful person, Aristotle suggests, has no need to embellish or diminish. They're comfortable with reality as it is. They'll tell you about their promotion without making it sound like they single-handedly saved the company, and they'll acknowledge their mistakes without turning them into elaborate tales of victimhood. Perhaps most delightfully, Aristotle explores wit as a virtue, the ability to say and enjoy amusing things in the right measure. He contrasts the buffoon, who turns everything into a joke regardless of appropriateness, with the boor, who never sees humor in anything and takes offense at others' attempts at levity. The witty person knows when humor serves the situation and when it distracts from more serious matters. Think about the friend who always knows exactly what to say to lighten a tense moment without trivializing genuine concerns, versus the one who either kills every joke with overanalysis or turns every serious conversation into a comedy routine. That perfect pitch of appropriate humor, that's virtue in action. What makes all of this so compelling is how Aristotle grounds these abstract virtues in the texture of real relationships and social situations. He's not just giving us moral rules, he's offering a framework for navigating the countless small decisions that shape our character and our connections with others. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to practice virtue, to find that elusive but satisfying balance between extremes. As we wrap up this exploration of specific virtues, we can see how Aristotle's insights create a roadmap for flourishing in community with others. These aren't just personal qualities to cultivate in isolation. They're the social skills that allow us to build meaningful relationships, contribute to our communities, and find our place in the larger human project. Next, we'll discover how Aristotle applies this same penetrating analysis to one of the most complex and essential human experiences: friendship. Welcome back to One Book, One Coffee, where we dive deep into the wisdom of great books with nothing but good conversation and, of course, a perfect cup of coffee. If you've been following along with our journey through Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, you've already discovered some profound insights about courage, friendship, and what it means to live well. Today, we're stepping into what might be the most socially relevant part of Aristotle's entire work: his exploration of justice. And trust me, this isn't some dry philosophical exercise. This is about the very foundation of how we live together as human beings. Picture this: you're standing in line at your favorite coffee shop, and someone cuts ahead of you. That flash of irritation you feel? That's your sense of justice being triggered. Or imagine you're at work, and you discover that a colleague doing the same job as you is making significantly more money for no apparent reason. That burning feeling in your chest? Justice again. Aristotle understood that justice isn't just some abstract concept debated in ivory towers. It's the glue that holds society together, the invisible force that makes cooperation possible. Now, think about this for a moment. What exactly do we mean when we say something is just or unjust? Aristotle noticed something fascinating. We use the word justice in two completely different ways, and most of us never even realize it. Sometimes we talk about justice as a virtue. You know, calling someone a just person because they're fair and honest in their dealings. But other times, we use justice to describe actions or situations. That law is unjust, or the verdict was just. It's like the word justice is doing double duty, and Aristotle wanted to understand why. Here's where it gets really interesting. Aristotle argues that justice as a virtue is actually the complete virtue. It's all the other virtues rolled into one, but specifically in relation to other people. Think of the most admirable person you know. Chances are, they're not just brave or generous or honest in isolation. They express these qualities in their relationships with others, and that's what makes them truly virtuous. A just person is someone who embodies courage, generosity, honesty, and temperance, but always with an eye toward how their actions affect their community. But then there's justice in the narrower sense, what Aristotle calls particular justice. This is where things get really practical and relevant to our daily lives. Imagine you're dividing a pizza among friends. How do you decide who gets what? If everyone contributed equally to buying the pizza, equal slices make sense. But what if one friend is much larger and hungrier? What if another friend is on a diet? What if someone contributed more money? Suddenly, this simple pizza situation becomes a masterclass in the complexity of justice. Aristotle identifies two main types of particular justice, and they're both playing out in that pizza scenario. The first is distributive justice, how we fairly distribute goods, honors, responsibilities, and burdens in society. The second is corrective justice, how we set things right when someone has been wronged. Let's explore both of these because they're absolutely everywhere in modern life. Distributive justice is perhaps the most contentious issue in any society. Should everyone get an equal share, or should distribution be based on merit, need, contribution, or something else entirely? Aristotle's insight is that different communities might reasonably choose different principles of distribution, but whatever principle they choose should be applied consistently. In a democracy, we might distribute political power equally. One person, one vote. In a business, we might distribute profits based on contribution or performance. In a family, we might distribute resources based on need. Consider how this plays out in contemporary debates about taxation. Some argue that everyone should pay the same percentage. That's one vision of distributive justice based on proportional equality. Others argue that those with more should pay a higher percentage because they have a greater capacity to contribute. That's distributive justice based on ability. Still others focus on what people deserve based on their efforts or circumstances. Aristotle doesn't tell us which principle is correct, but he does insist that whatever principle we choose should be applied fairly and consistently. The beauty of Aristotle's analysis is that he recognizes these aren't just political questions. They're deeply human questions that we face every day. When you're deciding how to split household chores with your roommates, you're grappling with distributive justice. When a teacher decides how to grade students, they're making decisions about distributive justice. When parents decide how to allocate attention and resources among their children, distributive justice is at work. Now, let's talk about corrective justice, which might be even more relevant to our daily experience. This is about restoring balance when someone has been wronged. Aristotle uses a brilliant mathematical metaphor here. Imagine injustice as creating an imbalance. One person gains something they shouldn't have, and another person loses something they should have kept. Corrective justice is about restoring the equilibrium. Think about our legal system. When someone steals your car, they've created an imbalance. They've gained your property illegally, and you've lost it. Justice requires not just punishing the thief, but ideally returning the car to you. When someone breaks a contract, they've created an imbalance between what was promised and what was delivered. Justice seeks to restore that balance, often through compensation. But corrective justice isn't just about courts and legal systems. It's about the everyday moral accounting we do in our relationships. When someone hurts your feelings and then apologizes, they're attempting to restore balance. When you accidentally break something that belongs to a friend and offer to replace it, you're practicing corrective justice. When a company issues a refund for a defective product, they're acknowledging an imbalance and working to correct it. Here's what's truly remarkable about Aristotle's analysis. He recognizes that justice isn't just about following rules or maximizing happiness. It's about maintaining the social fabric that makes human flourishing possible. Without justice, we can't trust each other. Without trust, we can't cooperate. Without cooperation, we can't build the kind of communities where people can live good lives. Consider how this insight applies to our modern world. Why do we care so much about fairness in sports? Because without fair play, the entire enterprise loses meaning. Why do we get upset about corruption in government? Because it undermines the trust that democratic institutions require to function. Why do workplace harassment policies matter so much? Because they protect the conditions necessary for productive collaboration. Aristotle also makes a crucial distinction between what's naturally just and what's just by convention. Some aspects of justice seem universal: the prohibition against murder, the requirement to keep promises, the principle that people should be treated with basic dignity. But other aspects of justice vary from culture to culture and time to time. The specific rules about property ownership, marriage, or political participation might differ between societies, but every functioning society needs some rules about these things. This distinction is incredibly relevant today as we navigate questions about cultural relativism and universal human rights. Aristotle's framework suggests that while the specific content of just laws might vary, the need for justice itself is universal. Every society needs ways to distribute resources fairly and correct wrongs, even if they disagree about the details. As we wrap up our exploration of Aristotle's insights on justice, it's worth reflecting on how these ancient ideas illuminate our contemporary challenges. Whether we're debating healthcare policy, arguing about criminal justice reform, or simply trying to be fair in our personal relationships, we're grappling with the same fundamental questions that Aristotle identified over 2,000 years ago. How do we live together fairly? How do we create systems that allow everyone to flourish? How do we balance individual freedom with collective responsibility? The wisdom here isn't in finding easy answers, but in asking the right questions and thinking clearly about what's at stake. Justice isn't just a nice ideal. It's the foundation that makes everything else possible. And that's a truth worth carrying with us, whether we're changing the world or simply trying to be good neighbors, one cup of coffee at a time. So we've been exploring Aristotle's ideas about moral virtue, about finding that golden mean between extremes. And now, he's about to take us somewhere fascinating. Picture this. You're sitting across from Aristotle himself, maybe in one of those ancient Greek courtyards with the afternoon light filtering through olive trees. And he leans forward with that look teachers get when they're about to reveal something really important. He's been talking about courage and generosity and all these character traits, but now he pauses and says something like, "But wait, my friend, there's another whole dimension to being an excellent human being that we haven't explored yet." This is where we dive into Book 6 of the Nicomachean Ethics, and honestly, this might be one of the most practically useful sections for our modern lives. Aristotle is about to introduce us to what he calls the intellectual virtues, and trust me, this isn't some dry academic exercise. This is about the different ways our minds can be excellent, the different types of intelligence and wisdom that make life not just good, but truly flourishing. Now, think about this for a moment. When we talk about someone being virtuous today, what usually comes to mind? Probably moral qualities, right? someone who's honest, kind, fair. But Aristotle had this brilliant insight that virtue isn't just about character, it's also about how we think, how we understand the world, how we make decisions. He recognized that there are virtues of the mind just as surely as there are virtues of character. Imagine you're trying to solve a complex problem at work. You need different kinds of thinking, don't you? You need the ability to analyze data, to understand abstract principles, to see practical solutions, to make good judgments about what will actually work in the real world. Aristotle saw this too, and he mapped out 5 distinct intellectual virtues, 5 different ways our minds can excel. The first one he calls episteme, which we might translate as scientific knowledge or demonstrative knowledge. This is the kind of thinking that deals with things that are necessarily true, universal principles, mathematical proofs, scientific laws. Think about how we know that 2 + 2 = 4, or how we understand the laws of physics. This knowledge is certain, universal, and doesn't change based on circumstances. When your GPS calculates the shortest route to your destination, it's using this kind of rigorous, systematic thinking. But here's where it gets interesting. Aristotle knew that this kind of knowledge, as valuable as it is, can't guide us through most of life's important decisions. Scientific knowledge can tell us how gravity works, but it can't tell us whether we should take that new job offer or how to handle a difficult conversation with our teenager. So he introduces us to another intellectual virtue, nous, which means intuitive reason or understanding. This is that flash of insight, that moment when you suddenly see the underlying principle or pattern. It's what happens when a mathematician suddenly grasps a proof, or when you finally understand why your friend has been acting strangely lately. It's not logical reasoning exactly. It's more like intellectual perception, the ability to see truth directly. Then there's Sophia, theoretical wisdom, which combines scientific knowledge with intuitive understanding. This is the kind of wisdom that philosophers and theoretical scientists have, the ability to understand the deepest principles of reality. Think of someone like Einstein, who didn't just know a lot of facts about physics, but could see the fundamental patterns underlying the universe. Now, you might be wondering, this is all very impressive, but how does it help me figure out whether to move to a new city or how to raise my kids? And this is exactly where Aristotle's genius shines through, because he recognized that for practical life, we need a completely different kind of intellectual virtue. He calls it phronesis, practical wisdom, and honestly, this might be the most important concept in all of ethics. Practical wisdom is the ability to deliberate well about human affairs, to figure out what to do in particular situations, to see what's really at stake and choose the right course of action. It's not about abstract principles. It's about navigating the messy, complicated, ever-changing world of human relationships and decisions. Think about someone you know who just seems to make good decisions consistently. Maybe it's a friend who always knows what to say in difficult situations, or a colleague who can see through complex workplace politics to find solutions that work for everyone. They might not be the smartest person in the room in terms of raw intelligence, but they have this knack for practical wisdom. Aristotle tells us that practical wisdom is absolutely essential for moral virtue. Here's why. You can have all the good intentions in the world, but if you don't know how to apply them in real situations, your virtue becomes useless or even harmful. Imagine someone who wants to be generous but doesn't know when or how to give, so they end up enabling destructive behavior. Or think about someone who values honesty but doesn't understand when brutal honesty might actually be cruel. Practical wisdom is what allows us to hit that golden mean we talked about earlier. It's what helps us figure out that the right amount of confidence in this situation, with this person, at this moment, is different from what it was yesterday, or will be tomorrow. It's contextual, flexible, responsive to the particular circumstances we find ourselves in. The fifth intellectual virtue is techne, which we might call craft knowledge or technical skill. This is the knowledge that guides production, the kind of thinking that goes into making something well. Whether you're a carpenter building a cabinet, a chef preparing a meal, or a software developer writing code, you're exercising this kind of intellectual virtue. What's fascinating is how Aristotle distinguishes between technical skill and practical wisdom. Both involve knowing how to do something, but technical skill is about making things, while practical wisdom is about action in the moral sphere. A skilled manipulator might have excellent technical knowledge about how to influence people, but they lack practical wisdom because they're not aiming at what's genuinely good. Now, here's where this all becomes incredibly relevant for us today. We live in an age that's absolutely obsessed with technical knowledge and information. We can Google any fact, access any piece of scientific knowledge, learn any skill through online tutorials. But how much attention do we pay to developing practical wisdom? Think about it. When was the last time you deliberately practiced the art of good judgment? When did you last reflect on how to become better at seeing what's really important in complex situations, or how to balance competing values when they conflict? We spend enormous amounts of time and energy developing technical skills for our careers, but how much effort goes into developing the intellectual virtue that guides how we live? Aristotle would say this is backwards. Practical wisdom is what integrates everything else. It's what takes all your other knowledge and skills and helps you use them well. Without it, you might become incredibly sophisticated, but still make terrible life decisions. As we transition from thinking about intellectual virtues to considering how they work together with moral virtues, remember that for Aristotle, the goal isn't just to understand these concepts intellectually. The goal is to become the kind of person who embodies them, who lives with both good character and excellent judgment. Because in the end, that's what eudaimonia, that flourishing life we're all seeking, really requires. Not just good intentions or smart thinking alone, but the beautiful integration of both. Picture this. You're sitting at your kitchen table at 2 a.m, staring at a half-eaten pint of ice cream, wondering how exactly you got here when just this afternoon you promised yourself you'd start eating healthier. Sound familiar? Well, congratulations. You've just experienced what Aristotle spent an entire section of his Nicomachean Ethics trying to understand, and what he called the fascinating puzzle of human self-control, or as he put it, the battle between continence and incontinence. Now, before we dive into this deliciously complex territory, let me set the scene for you. We've been journeying through Aristotle's masterpiece together, exploring his ideas about virtue, friendship, and the good life. But here in Book 7, he tackles something that hits incredibly close to home, that maddening gap between knowing what we should do and actually doing it. It's the space between our best intentions and our actual behavior, and frankly, it's where most of us live our daily lives. Aristotle begins this exploration by acknowledging something that might surprise you about ancient philosophy. He admits he's genuinely puzzled by human behavior. Here's this brilliant mind, one of history's greatest thinkers, essentially saying, "You know what? People are weird, and I need to figure this out." He's looking at the phenomenon where someone can know perfectly well that something is bad for them, understand all the reasons why they shouldn't do it, and then go ahead and do it anyway. Think about the smoker who knows every health risk, the person who checks their phone while driving despite knowing the dangers, or yes, our midnight ice cream adventurer. The question that fascinated Aristotle was this: how can someone act against their own knowledge? It seems almost impossible when you think about it logically. If you truly know something is harmful, why would you choose to do it? It's like saying someone can simultaneously know that 2 plus 2 equals 4 and also believe it equals 5. The logic just doesn't compute. But here's where Aristotle's genius shines through. Instead of dismissing this as simple human weakness or stupidity, he digs deeper. He realizes there are different types of knowledge, and not all knowledge is created equal. There's the kind of knowledge you have when you recite facts, like knowing that excessive drinking is bad for your health. But then there's the kind of knowledge that's active and present in the moment of decision. The knowledge that's actually guiding your hand as you reach for that third glass of wine at dinner. Aristotle draws a fascinating parallel here. He says it's like the difference between an actor reciting lines about love and someone who's actually in love. The actor knows all the words, can deliver them perfectly, might even move the audience to tears. But the person in love? They're living the reality of those words. Their knowledge isn't just intellectual, it's embodied, immediate, and transformative. This leads us to one of Aristotle's most practical insights about human nature. He suggests that when we act against our better judgment, we're not really acting against knowledge in the fullest sense. Instead, we're acting in a state where our knowledge has become, shall we say, temporarily unavailable. Think of it like this. Imagine your rational mind as a wise advisor who usually sits right next to you, offering excellent counsel. But sometimes, when you're angry, passionate, stressed, or overwhelmed, it's as if that advisor steps out of the room. The knowledge is still there, but it's not actively present to guide your decisions. Now, this might sound like Aristotle is making excuses for bad behavior, but he's actually doing something much more sophisticated. He's distinguishing between different types of people and different types of moral failures. There's the person who lacks self-control, what he calls the incontinent person. And then there's the person who's genuinely vicious. The difference is crucial and deeply hopeful. The vicious person has corrupted values. They don't think kindness is important, or they believe that might makes right, or they've convinced themselves that lying is perfectly acceptable. Their actions align with their beliefs, but their beliefs themselves are twisted. The incontinent person, on the other hand, has good values, but struggles to live up to them. They know kindness matters. They believe in honesty. They want to be better, but they keep falling short. Here's the beautiful part. Aristotle sees much more hope for the incontinent person than for the vicious one. Why? Because the incontinent person still has the right target in sight. They're like an archer who knows exactly where the bullseye is but struggles with their aim, while the vicious person is shooting confidently and accurately at the wrong target entirely. This distinction becomes incredibly relevant when we think about how we judge ourselves and others. That colleague who keeps promising to stop gossiping but slips up again? They might be struggling with incontinence, not lacking basic decency. Your friend who knows they should exercise but can't seem to stick to a routine? Same thing. Even you, wrestling with whatever habit or behavior you're trying to change, understanding this difference can transform how you approach personal growth. But Aristotle doesn't stop at diagnosis. He's interested in solutions. He introduces us to the concept of continence, the ability to do the right thing even when you don't feel like it. The continent person experiences the same temptations and struggles as the incontinent person, but they've developed the strength to act according to their better judgment anyway. They're not naturally virtuous saints who never feel tempted. They're people who feel the pull of temptation and choose differently. Think about this in modern terms. The continent person is the one who feels like staying in bed but gets up for their morning run anyway. They're the parent who's exhausted and frustrated but speaks calmly to their child. They're the professional who's tempted to cut corners but does the thorough work anyway. They haven't eliminated desire or struggle. They've learned to act well despite it. This brings us to perhaps the most practical question in this entire section. How do we move from incontinence to continence, and ultimately toward genuine virtue? Aristotle suggests it's about strengthening what we might call our moral muscles. Just as physical exercise makes us stronger over time, repeatedly choosing the right action, even when it's difficult, builds our capacity for future right action. The path from struggle to strength isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. Every time you choose the harder right over the easier wrong, you're not just making one good decision. You're literally reshaping who you are. You're moving from being someone who knows what's right but struggles to do it, toward being someone who does what's right because that's simply who you've become. As we wrap up this exploration of self-control and human struggle, remember that Aristotle isn't asking us to become emotionless robots or to never feel temptation. He's showing us a path toward becoming people whose deepest values and daily actions align more consistently. In our next conversation, we'll explore how this understanding of self-control connects to Aristotle's broader vision of human flourishing and the role of pleasure in a well-lived life. Picture yourself sitting in your favorite coffee shop, watching people around you. There's the couple sharing dessert, completely absorbed in each other's stories. Over there, two business partners are deep in conversation about their next venture. And in the corner, childhood friends are laughing until they cry, picking up exactly where they left off despite not seeing each other for months. What you're witnessing is something Aristotle considered absolutely essential to human flourishing: friendship in all its beautiful, complex forms. Now, you might be thinking, really? A whole section on friendship? Isn't that just common sense? But here's where Aristotle's genius shines through. He doesn't just tell us that friendship is nice to have, like a comfortable sweater or a good playlist. He argues that friendship is actually fundamental to living a meaningful life, so much so that he dedicates more space to discussing friendship than almost any other topic in his Ethics. Think about that for a moment. This ancient philosopher, wrestling with questions about virtue and happiness and the good life, decides that understanding friendship deserves as much attention as understanding courage or justice. Aristotle starts by making a distinction that will completely change how you think about your relationships. He identifies 3 types of friendship, and here's the beautiful part. He's not ranking them from worst to best. He's showing us that different relationships serve different purposes in our lives, like different tools in a workshop, each valuable in its own way. First, there are friendships of utility. Before you wrinkle your nose at that word, utility, think about your relationship with your accountant, your workout buddy, or that colleague who always knows which coffee shop has the shortest line. These relationships exist because both people benefit from them in practical ways. Your running partner motivates you to get out of bed at 6 in the morning, and you do the same for them. Your study group friend helps you understand calculus, and you help them with history. Aristotle isn't dismissing these relationships as shallow or selfish. He's recognizing that humans are social creatures who naturally help each other navigate life's challenges. But here's the catch with utility friendships. They tend to dissolve when the mutual benefit disappears. Remember that friend from your old job who you used to grab lunch with every day? Once one of you switched companies, did you gradually lose touch, That's not a failure of character on either side. It's just the natural life cycle of a utility-based friendship. The relationship served its purpose beautifully while it lasted. The second type is friendship based on pleasure. These are the people you genuinely enjoy being around because they make you laugh, share your hobbies, or bring out your playful side. Think about your trivia night crew, your hiking buddies, or that friend who always knows about the coolest new restaurants. You're drawn together by shared enjoyment, common interests, or simply because you have fun in each other's company. Now, here's something fascinating that Aristotle observed. Pleasure-based friendships are particularly common among young people. And when you think about it, doesn't that ring true? In college, you might become instant friends with someone simply because you both love the same obscure band or stay up all night discussing movies. But as people grow and change, their tastes evolve, their circumstances shift, and sometimes these friendships naturally fade. The person who was your constant companion during your party phase might feel like a stranger once you enter your career-focused phase. Again, this isn't anyone's fault. It's just how these relationships work. But then Aristotle introduces us to something truly special: friendships of virtue, or what he calls perfect friendship. These are the relationships that make your heart sing when you really think about them. These friends don't just help you accomplish tasks or have a good time, though they often do both. They see who you really are, encourage you to become your best self, and somehow make you feel more like yourself just by being around them. Here's what makes virtue-based friendship so remarkable. It's built on mutual admiration for each other's character. You don't just enjoy this person's company or find them useful. You genuinely respect who they are as a human being. You admire their integrity, their kindness, their courage, their wisdom. And here's the beautiful reciprocal part. They feel the same way about you. It's like having a mirror that reflects back not just your appearance, but your best qualities. Think about someone in your life who fits this description. Maybe it's a friend who calls you out when you're being unfair, but does it with such love that you actually thank them for it. Or someone who celebrates your victories without a trace of jealousy, and sits with you through your failures without trying to fix everything. This is the friend who knows your flaws intimately, but chooses to focus on your strengths. They make you want to be better, not because they demand it, but because their belief in you makes you believe in yourself. Aristotle makes a profound observation about these virtue-based friendships. They're incredibly rare. You might have dozens of utility friends and several pleasure friends throughout your life, but true virtue friendships, maybe a handful if you're lucky. And that's not because you're picky or antisocial. It's because this kind of friendship requires something extraordinary from both people: genuine goodness of character, deep mutual understanding, and the kind of time and attention that allows real intimacy to develop. But here's where Aristotle's wisdom becomes intensely practical for our modern lives. He argues that we need all three types of friendship to flourish as human beings. Trying to turn every casual acquaintance into a soul-deep connection would be exhausting and unrealistic. But having only utility or pleasure friendships without any deeper connections leaves us feeling hollow and disconnected. Consider how this plays out in our hyper-connected world. Social media gives us the illusion of friendship with hundreds or even thousands of people, but most of these connections are either utility-based, networking, information sharing, professional connections, or pleasure-based, entertainment, shared interests, casual social interaction. There's nothing wrong with these connections, but Aristotle would remind us that they can't substitute for the deeper relationships that truly sustain us. Now, think about this. Aristotle also explores what he calls self-love in the context of friendship, and it's not what you might expect. He's not talking about narcissism or selfishness. He's suggesting that the relationship you have with yourself is actually the foundation for all other friendships. How can you truly appreciate someone else's virtues if you don't recognize and cultivate virtue in yourself? How can you offer genuine friendship if you don't understand what it means to be a friend to yourself? This ancient insight feels incredibly relevant today, doesn't it? In a culture that often promotes either harsh self-criticism or superficial self-promotion, Aristotle offers a middle path: knowing yourself honestly, working on your character, and developing the kind of inner stability that allows you to be truly present for others. As we close this exploration of Aristotelian friendship, consider this beautiful paradox. The philosopher who spent so much time thinking about individual virtue and personal excellence ultimately concluded that the good life is impossible without deep connection to others. We are not meant to be islands of virtue, admiring our own moral development in isolation. We are meant to be part of a community, supporting each other's growth, celebrating each other's victories, and walking together through life's inevitable challenges. The next time you're sipping your coffee and watching the world go by, you might see those relationships around you with new eyes, appreciating the intricate web of utility, pleasure, and virtue that connects us all in this beautiful, complicated human experience. So we've been talking about friendship, and honestly, I think Aristotle would have loved social media, not for the endless scrolling, but because he was absolutely fascinated by how we connect with each other, how we form bonds, and what makes some friendships last while others fade away like yesterday's Instagram story. In Book 9 of the Nicomachean Ethics, he dives even deeper into this territory, and what he discovers is both timeless and surprisingly relevant to our modern world of friendship requests and group chats. Picture this. You're sitting with Aristotle at a cafe, and he's watching people interact around him. He notices something fascinating about human relationships that we still struggle with today. Some friendships, he observes, are like those trendy restaurants that everyone talks about, but nobody really remembers a year later. Others are like that cozy neighborhood spot where you've been going for decades, where they know your order and your story. The difference, Aristotle argues, isn't just about time or convenience. It's about the very foundation of why we're friends in the first place. Now, think about this for a moment. When you scroll through your contacts or your social media friends, how many of those relationships would survive if the mutual benefit disappeared? Aristotle identified 3 distinct types of friendship, and understanding them is like having a roadmap for navigating the complex world of human relationships. There are friendships based on utility, where we're friends because we help each other out. There are friendships based on pleasure, where we enjoy each other's company because it's fun or entertaining. And then there are friendships based on virtue, where we admire and care for the person's character itself. The utility friendships are everywhere in our modern world. Think about your work relationships, your gym buddy who spots you during bench press, or that neighbor who always borrows your lawnmower but also helps you move furniture. These aren't shallow or wrong, but Aristotle points out something crucial. When the usefulness ends, so does the friendship. It's like a business partnership disguised as a personal relationship. The moment you change jobs, move to a different neighborhood, or find a new gym, these connections often dissolve naturally. There's nothing malicious about it, but there's also nothing particularly deep or lasting. Pleasure-based friendships are the fun ones, the people you party with, binge-watch shows with, or travel with because they make everything more enjoyable. These are the friends who light up your group chat with memes and always know the best new restaurants. But here's what Aristotle noticed, and what we've probably all experienced. When our interests change, when we go through different life phases, or when someone's idea of fun no longer aligns with ours, these friendships can become strained or simply fade away. Remember that friend from college who you had an absolute blast with, but now, when you meet for coffee, you struggle to find common ground? That's the limitation of pleasure-based friendship playing out in real time. But then there's the third type, and this is where Aristotle gets really excited. Friendships based on virtue are like finding treasure in your backyard. These are the people you admire not for what they can do for you or how much fun they are, though they might be both useful and enjoyable, but for who they are as human beings. You respect their character, their integrity, their way of moving through the world. And here's the beautiful part. They feel the same way about you. Aristotle argues that these virtue-based friendships are rare, and honestly, when you think about it, that makes perfect sense. How many people do you know whose character you truly admire? How many people know you well enough to admire your character in return? It takes time to really know someone's character. It takes shared experiences, seeing how they handle stress, disappointment, success, and moral dilemmas. It's like the difference between knowing someone's favorite coffee order and knowing how they treat the barista when the order is wrong. What's fascinating is how Aristotle describes the development of these deeper friendships. He talks about them like tending a garden. You can't rush the growth, you can't force the blooms, but with consistent care, attention, and the right conditions, something beautiful emerges. These friendships weather changes in circumstances, shifts in interests, even disagreements and conflicts, because they're rooted in something deeper than convenience or entertainment. Now, here's where it gets really interesting for our modern world. Aristotle argues that true friendship requires equality, not in terms of social status or wealth, but in terms of mutual care and respect. Think about your closest friendships. Aren't they the ones where you both invest equally in the relationship? Where you both check in on each other, celebrate each other's successes, and offer support during difficult times? It's not transactional, like keeping score, but there's a natural balance of give and take. This raises some challenging questions about our contemporary friendship landscape. In a world of social media followers, networking events, and busy schedules, how do we create space for these deeper connections to develop? Aristotle would probably be puzzled by the idea of having hundreds or thousands of friends online. Not because he was antisocial, but because he understood that meaningful friendship requires sustained attention and genuine care, which are naturally limited resources. He also explores something that resonates deeply with anyone who's ever been in a long-term friendship: the question of whether we should remain friends with someone who changes dramatically. What if your friend develops values you can't respect? What if they make choices that conflict with your own moral compass? Aristotle suggests that if the change is fundamental enough, the friendship based on character might naturally end, and that's not necessarily a failure. It's recognition that people grow in different directions, and forcing a connection that no longer has a genuine foundation isn't healthy for anyone involved. But here's the hopeful part of his analysis. When virtue-based friendships do work, when they endure and deepen over time, they become one of life's greatest sources of meaning and joy. These are the friends who become like family, who know your history and still choose to be part of your future. They're the ones you call during a crisis, the ones whose opinion matters when you're making big decisions, the ones who celebrate your victories as if they were their own. As we wrap up this exploration of Aristotle's deeper dive into friendship, consider this. In a world that often prioritizes networking over connection, efficiency over depth, and entertainment over substance, his insights offer a different path. They suggest that while we might have many acquaintances and casual friendships, investing in a few relationships based on mutual respect and admiration for character might be one of the most important things we can do for our own flourishing and happiness. After all, as Aristotle reminds us, we're social creatures by nature, and the quality of our relationships shapes the quality of our lives in ways we're only beginning to understand. Picture this. You're sitting across from the wisest person you've ever known, someone who spent their entire life thinking deeply about what it means to live well. The coffee between you has grown cold as you've been absorbed in conversation, and now they're about to share their final, most important insight. This is exactly where we find ourselves with Aristotle as we enter the 10th and final book of the Nicomachean Ethics, where he tackles the ultimate questions that keep us all awake at night. What is pleasure, really? And what does it mean to be truly happy? Now, think about this for a moment. How many times have you heard someone say, "I just want to be happy"? It's probably the most universal human desire, isn't it? Yet if you stopped 10 people on the street and asked them to define happiness, you'd likely get 10 different answers. Aristotle knew this confusion existed even 2,400 years ago, and he was determined to cut through the philosophical fog to give us something concrete to work with. Let's start with pleasure, because Aristotle realizes that most people confuse pleasure with happiness. Imagine you're at your favorite restaurant, savoring the most incredible meal you've ever tasted. The flavors are dancing on your tongue, you're with people you love, and in that moment, you feel absolutely wonderful. That's pleasure, and Aristotle doesn't dismiss it as unimportant. But here's where his insight becomes fascinating. He argues that pleasure isn't something we can chase directly. Instead, pleasure is what naturally emerges when we're doing something excellently. Think of it like this. When a musician sits down at the piano and loses themselves completely in a beautiful piece, the pleasure they experience isn't separate from the music making itself. The pleasure completes the activity, like sunlight completing a perfect spring day. You can't bottle that sunlight and carry it around with you, just like you can't manufacture genuine pleasure by pursuing it directly. This is why people who spend their lives chasing one pleasurable experience after another often end up feeling empty and restless. They're trying to capture something that only exists as the natural flowering of meaningful activity. But Aristotle goes deeper than this. He wants us to understand that not all pleasures are created equal. Some pleasures come from activities that align with our highest human capacities, while others come from satisfying our more basic impulses. Now, he's not being a killjoy here, suggesting that we should never enjoy a good meal or a comfortable bed. Rather, he's pointing out something we've all experienced. The pleasure that comes from accomplishing something difficult and worthwhile feels fundamentally different from the pleasure of, say, binge-watching television for 6 hours straight. Consider the difference between the satisfaction you feel after completing a challenging project at work versus the fleeting enjoyment of scrolling through social media. Both might be pleasant in the moment, but one leaves you feeling energized and proud, while the other often leaves you feeling vaguely depleted. Aristotle would say this isn't coincidental. The higher pleasures, those that come from exercising our distinctly human capacities for reason, creativity, and virtue, have a different quality entirely. They're more lasting, more fulfilling, and they contribute to what he calls eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but really meaning something closer to human flourishing. This brings us to Aristotle's revolutionary insight about happiness itself. Most of us think of happiness as a feeling, something that comes and goes like the weather. We say things like, "I'm happy today," or "that made me happy." But Aristotle argues that true happiness isn't a momentary emotion at all. Instead, it's a way of living, a pattern of activity that extends across an entire lifetime. Here's a powerful analogy he might use if he were alive today. Think about physical fitness. You wouldn't say someone is physically fit because they had one good workout, or even because they feel energetic on a particular Tuesday. Fitness is a condition of the body that results from consistent, excellent habits over time. Similarly, happiness is a condition of the soul that results from consistently excellent choices and actions throughout a lifetime. This is why Aristotle famously suggests that we can't really call someone happy until their life is complete. Now, this might sound morbid at first, but think about what he's really saying. Consider how many people seem to have everything going for them, achieving success after success, only to make choices later in life that unravel everything they've built. Or think about people who struggle for decades, but ultimately create lives of deep meaning and contribution. The happiness Aristotle is talking about isn't about individual moments of joy or pleasure, but about the overall shape and direction of a life well lived. So what does this life of flourishing actually look like? Aristotle argues that it involves the excellent use of our highest human capacity, which he believes is our ability to think, contemplate, and understand. But before you worry that he's advocating for a life of pure intellectualism, remember that Aristotle has spent 9 books showing us how thinking and virtue are intimately connected. The person who truly flourishes is someone who has developed excellent habits of character, who acts courageously, justly, and temperately, and who uses their rational capacity to navigate the complexities of human relationships and civic responsibility. But here's where Aristotle's vision becomes almost transcendent. He suggests that the highest form of human happiness comes from contemplation, from the use of our minds to understand truth and beauty for their own sake. This might seem abstract until you think about those moments when you've been completely absorbed in understanding something beautiful or profound. Maybe you were reading a poem that suddenly revealed a deep truth about human experience, or working through a complex problem until the solution became crystal clear, or simply sitting in nature and feeling a profound sense of connection to something larger than yourself. These moments of contemplation, Aristotle suggests, are when we're most fully human, when we're exercising the capacity that most distinguishes us from other animals. And interestingly, these moments often feel timeless. When you're truly absorbed in contemplation, you lose track of time, you forget your worries, and you experience something that feels almost divine. Now, Aristotle isn't suggesting that we should all become hermit philosophers, abandoning our families and responsibilities to sit in caves and think deep thoughts. He's practical enough to recognize that we're social beings with material needs and civic duties. But he is suggesting that a life that includes regular opportunities for genuine contemplation and learning is a life that touches something eternal and deeply satisfying. As we close this remarkable journey through the Nicomachean Ethics, we might ask ourselves, what would our lives look like if we took Aristotle's vision seriously? What if we pursued pleasure not by chasing it directly, but by engaging excellently in meaningful activities? What if we understood happiness not as a fleeting emotion to be captured, but as a way of living to be cultivated over time? These aren't just ancient philosophical curiosities. They're invitations to examine our own lives and choices with fresh eyes. And perhaps with our coffee now cold and our conversation drawing to a close, we can carry these insights forward into the beautiful complexity of actually living well. In Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle explores the profound questions of what it means to live a good life, emphasizing virtue as the path to achieving eudaimonia, or true happiness. Throughout the book, he delves into the nature of virtues, the importance of rationality, and the role of character in ethical living. By examining the balance between excess and deficiency, Aristotle presents a framework for individuals to cultivate a life of moral and intellectual virtue. Here are some key takeaways. 1. Virtue as a habit. Aristotle teaches that virtue is not a one-time achievement, but a habit cultivated through repeated actions. To apply this, start incredibly small. Focus on practicing kindness daily or exercising self-control in minor situations, gradually building up to more significant challenges. 2. The golden mean. Aristotle's concept of the golden mean suggests that virtue lies between two extremes. Find balance in your life by assessing where you might be overindulging or neglecting essential aspects. For instance, if you're working too much, try to carve out time for leisure and relationships. 3. Pursuit of eudaimonia. Happiness, according to Aristotle, is an activity aligned with virtue. Begin by identifying activities that align with your values and bring you joy, then integrate them into your routine. Be patient with yourself as you strive for this balance. 4. Rational living. Aristotle underscores the importance of rationality in making ethical decisions. To apply this, engage in regular reflection and purposeful decision-making. Start by journaling your thoughts or practicing mindfulness to make more rational choices. 5. Friendship and community. Aristotle highlights the significance of friendships in achieving a virtuous life. Foster meaningful connections by reaching out to old friends or joining community groups that share your interests. Remember, building strong relationships takes time and consistency. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with at least one idea from this book that stuck with you. One concept you're going to carry forward. It could be something that challenged your thinking, something you want to try, or even something you disagreed with. Your insight might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. And if this summary gave you something valuable, a new perspective, a spark of motivation, or even just a peaceful hour with your coffee, share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe to One Book, One Coffee and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new summary. Every week, we sit down together with one great book, one warm cup of coffee, and the simple belief that wisdom, shared well, can change lives. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, every small step counts. See you at the next book.